But pretty much what we are going to experience today is pulling a lot of espressos that don't taste as espresso-like as people may want them to taste. So the reason why I've started to avoid espresso for a lot of reasons is because it's always, it's hard to taste espresso. Like, it's hard to taste the nuances of coffees in espresso, because what you're really tasting, or like, you have to learn how to taste coffees like these pulled as espresso, is that there's a lot of, with these like really premium coffees, these like high scoring coffees and whatever, all the expensive stuff, the reason why they cost a lot of money is because they're usually these like nuanced characteristics, like extensions of flavor notes and things that are tied to that like tie one flavor note to another. And, there are these like really interesting subtleties, or, maybe they're very, very loud coffees. And the problem with espresso is that you end up with a medium of coffee that obscures some of those nuances. Well, simply put, because you have two things going on. One is pressure and crema, and the second is high TDS. Not to say that high TDS is bad, but you're tasting a concentrate, and when you have such compacted flavors together, it makes tasting things kind of hard. So for these coffees that have these, super special characteristics and all of that, it can get a little difficult to experience those very small, nuanced attributes. And I have seen people run through this experience of like spending a lot of money on, say, a very fancy gesha or whatever, and then they're like, oh, I don't understand why this is so expensive. It tastes like, whatever, tastes like coffee, right? And then maybe it's because all they're doing is they're tasting crema or whatever. So anyway, Flair, I have this set up. This guy is set to three on the dots. This is the rest of the Kenyan gesha. We might as well just pull this. My dosages these days have been around 17 grams, and I have a high flow basket, Wafo Spirit. So a lot of things have to happen here. A lot of things, like basically what's going to happen is more of these premium coffees, like all these coffees are all really light, right? They're gonna look ugly. You shouldn't care about, what the visuals look like in terms of espresso, right? This is like the enlightened view that I want everybody to eventually have in coffee, is that, what it looks like, it doesn't matter, generally speaking. This coffee was, $80 for 125 grams. So very expensive. And, espresso to me, a really well pulled shot of espresso is quite memorable. And that's the one thing, is like, I remember coffees a lot for like some of these like nuances, or it's like loud or, whatever. But to really seal the deal, I think if you pull like a coffee as an espresso and you do it really well, it is actually very memorable. And that's what I did with the Bean and Bean 91.5 Alita. Was we pulled it on the Mavam on that stream. It was like, I was like, wow, this was a memorable coffee, because you just can amplify a lot of those things with an espresso. So anyway, we're gonna do that with this Kenyan gesha. And there is a sweet spot on the Flair where you're able to maintain steady flow rate when you're doing pre-infusion, and it's like not too coarse. And you can do most of the modulation through pressure. But as I've mentioned towards the end, if you guys like want to open up another tab and you want to watch like the other stuff we were talking about yesterday, is I really like shots that as the puck saturates and you see pressures go down, degrade, your puck degrades, your pressure drops, your flow goes up. I really like it when these two lines kind of intersect. Kettle temperature, 90 Celsius, Flair on 3 dots, 17 grams, which just happened to be the rest of my Kenyan gesha. Also, there's a new normal dose tamper. So the guy from Normal Dose sent the new one over. So we were playing with that yesterday on the stream. We just woke up. We gotta get it ready. The first shot we're gonna pull is a Kenyan gesha. We'll wake up and we'll start talking about stuff. I'm gonna pour this in. I do feel like with the very first shot, your temperatures might be on the slightly lower side. We pull a lot of these shots quite fast, so it doesn't really matter. And because the chamber is heated, I haven't really experienced any downsides there. Okay, so I have to do this reverse. The first thing, I don't know if you guys can see pressure here, but we're gonna introduce water. We get a little bit of like maybe 2 bars, and then I just am pushing down until 6 bars. And then I'm slightly letting off of it, and I'm letting the pressure drop. So what that shot was, I didn't even time that, but that shot was like maybe 15 seconds. Felt like 15 seconds. So this was 17 to 71.4. So I was doing like kind of 2 things there. One was that initial introduction of flow. So we see the pressure gauge go up to like 2-ish bars. So this is how I pull shots on the bomb, okay? And even on the decent, is 1 second saturation, and then really strong ramp up. So this is that turbo boom profile that I've been using for years now on the decent, and we end up with this. This is the ratio that I'm tending to like with the 01, or with a lot of these burrs is in the larger areas. So we actually don't get that much crema, even though the pressure here, like I was pushing relatively hard, I would say, and you with the Flair and with all these lever machines, you for sure can feel that there is the resistance gets lower as you are saturating the puck with water. And you know, really when you're ramping up flow. So that was the thing, as I was saying, is the pressure is dropping and our flow is going up, and you can kind of see the flow. You know, this was like going up when it becomes easier to push through. But we have a lot of modulation because we can literally feel it. So I was feeling like the resistance when I was getting to about 6 bars, I could have pushed it harder and actually probably increased the pressure because the puck still had some resistance to it. But what I was doing there is I felt when I was getting to that 6 bar area, I was letting a little bit off the physical pressure on here on the lever. See the pressure drop. So you know our pressure value is 2 bar pre-infusion for 1 second. You see you'll see the pressure drop instantly, and then it'll ramp back up as you push it up. And you know, we don't get that much crema. We do get a little bit of crema because you will find crema. I would say anything above 4-ish bars. Although not so much with this type of coffee. 1.2 divided by 17. This is, you know, your 1-to-4 ratio. So this is, you know, in your higher ratios, which is exactly what I'm looking for. And this type of espresso is going to be very acidity forward. I think, you know, it's going to be clear. It's going to be acidity forward. It's going to be vibrant, but you're sacrificing a lot of, I would say, sweetness and finish. But you can maybe retain some of that because 1, you use a really right coffee, or 2, you lower some of the pressures, like the lower the flow at the end. So, incredible coffee. Kenyan gesha is so special. Very tropical, very floral, but the most thing that I'm experiencing is this acidity that is there. The acidity is very layered and nuanced. So this was the thing I was talking about at the very beginning of the stream. When you have these 90+ coffees, you have these premium coffees. There is a depth of acidity and an extension of flavor that is very difficult to capture in espresso. But if you're pulling at these larger ratios, we're reducing the TDS and we're getting a very, I would say, even extraction because of the flows we're pulling at and the basket we're using. We see very even extraction, and you should have a puck that doesn't have a lot of black spots in it or different colored spots. You should have like a very even looking puck. So that's like one indicator. The second thing really is still the main thing to focus on still with this is the flavor. Is that you're getting this acidity, vibrancy forward shot with this profile, with the turbo bloom, and it allows you to experience a lot of those nuances, but amplify them because it's in espresso. So think about all of these very subtle flavor notes. For example, like let's look at this coffee here. It says like red apple, black currant, floral, crisp acidity, right? You probably, there's like a lot of those flavor notes on the bag there. You probably will get like a more amplified note in the layering there. But with this type of espresso profile, generally you're going to lose out on a lot of the balance. You're going to lose out on a lot of the balance, and you're going to lose out a lot on the inherent sweetness. I've mentioned this in many videos and many streams, is I still believe most people prefer balanced and sweet espresso, even with coffees of this caliber. And the biggest difference between balanced and sweet espresso, to kind of still, we're going to pull this and we'll get to there. The biggest difference between this balanced sweet espresso and very acidity forward espresso to still, I would say, properly present coffees with this level of nuance and level of complexity is pre-infusion time. We can do that with something like a Flair, but you know, these are coffees where it's like, it doesn't look like I mean, yes, you can tell it's high TDS, right? But it isn't like crema bomb and you know, ugly things like that, right? Tiger Stripe's ugly. Get me the hell out of there, right? We don't want coffees. We don't want any shots that look like that at all for these types of coffees. That is literally how you throw money away. If you pull an espresso that looks like that with these coffees, you know, it's hard to say where that goes. I would just scrape the crema off at that point. Anyway, as we taste this, let's let it cool. Taste it. Very upfront acidity, right? If you think about how I do the V60 recipe, think about that, but amplified. That's the type of effect I was going for with that recipe. That's the effect that's happening with Turbo Bloom, is main things that are lingering on your palate that are presented to you are the inherent one main acidity component of that coffee that you're pulling. Then as it lingers, then you're getting kind of that extension of flavor notes. And the finish is clean, it is sweet, but the main thing to focus on that is going to be present is acidity. So that is like the shot that I just pulled. The other thing I do want to mention with this type of shot and all the shots we're going to pull, keep in mind of temperature and ramp up flow rate. So as you're pulling down the lever, as you're introducing water into the puck, keep in mind of the flow rate. So the reason why you want to keep in mind of temperature and flow rate is these are kind of interlinked to the grinder you're using. So for example, if you are using a low clarity burr set, like a niche 0, for example, and you try pulling this style of shot, you may end up with an incredibly harsh coffee, or you might end up with a lot of flavors that kind of fall apart, like tasting an espresso shot where the flow was clearly too fast and you aren't extracting enough. So the shot I pulled there was like, what, 15 seconds long. I'm using a 102 millimeter blind flat burr that is really strong in these very fast flow rates. You may want to slow things down by 5-ish seconds if you're using 5 to 10 seconds if you're using a lower clarity burr set. So that's the thing to keep in mind, is like adjust this to taste. The other thing to keep in mind that I mentioned is temperature. As you're pulling shots that have faster and faster flow, you want to reduce temperature because you can end up with this like literal roughness or ashiness towards the back, towards the finish of your espresso. So I was pulling 90 Celsius here. I like 90 for some of these coffees because I am pulling in this kind of really faster area of like 10 to 15 seconds, and you do need some amount of temperature to, you know, extract these lighter roast coffees. But for example, on the decent, if I would pull this type of shot, I think my group head temperature is around 86, 88 Celsius. On this, you know, I've found 90 to work well with these burr sets. So there's some interlinkage between all of these different variables of like temperature, your flow. If we look at numbers here, I would say if your flow is above 4 mils a second, like exiting, that's when you probably should really reduce temperature. But you can actually keep most of these variables the same and just change temperature, and that might actually get you very, very close to what you're looking for. And I think mostly if you want to round things out, you want to make things sweeter, you want to reduce the temperature. But there is an amount of temperature you don't want to reduce too much, because then you don't have hot enough water to extract some of the acidity components, like, you know, the nuances and the acidity out of coffees like this. So that's just like the general, like, bigger picture things to keep in mind, of aside from, okay, yeah, just pull pour the water in and, you know, push hard first, then wait a second, then push really hard, right? Those are the other things that will help kind of improve the experience of these types of espressos. And mostly what we're trying to do is we're trying to clean up a lot of the things in the aftertaste and the finish. That's really where I detect a lot of problems with espressos, right? And generally speaking, I think most people are detecting things like, oh, it tastes harsh, or it tastes rough, or it tastes, you know, too weak or too strong, or whatever. And all of that happens kind of in the finish. But the main focus here is to shift everything with this style of shot, to shift everything to the front, so we experience everything there, and then clean up the back after we have this like long linger of acidity. And we clean up the back by, one, reducing pressures here at times, or reducing temperatures, or, you know, keeping check of flow. And kind of the variable you want to plug in here, or like the main factor to plug in here, is what grinder do you have, right? If you have a lower clarity burst set, you should probably maybe use lower flow here, and maybe slightly hotter temperatures. If you have a really high extracting grinder like your 98 flats, maybe you want a lower temperature here, and then you can increase flow here. So there's a various different ways to play around with this, and that's what makes, you know, this manual espresso stuff very, very fun. If you have a machine that is limited based on flow here, this is where you will adjust grind. So like, because we have a manual machine here and we can drastically influence flow, and we kind of don't have to worry too much about is the puck going to look okay, because we have a very fast flowing basket here. We can kind of compensate by, you know, being actually a little bit on the finer side and pushing down harder, because the machine isn't limited based on flow here. I would say still adjust this based on grind, because even if you have a flat, you know, say you have like an espresso machine that has like a flat flow rate, like Gesha Classic, or, you know, those types of machines, right? You can pull a profile that is set to a grind size where the flow is constant and the puck will naturally degrade, and you'll see that pressure decline anyway, right? So that's like one way to do it, is just adjust grind. But you can change a lot of these variables based on what is the actual max flow rate of your machine. And faster is not necessarily always better, right? I think most machines you should still be able to accomplish somewhere around 3 to 4 mils exit flow rate, or ramp up flow rate. And if you're not reaching those flow rates, you probably need to adjust your grind size. Like the espresso tech nowadays is like, let's try to make espresso not taste like espresso, right? Let's like evenly extract. Let's remove crema. Let's try to have very fast flow, right? And tame TDS, right? Lower the TDS, stretch out the ratios, and get all of those nuances. Kind of crazy that we're doing this. Why even make espresso in the first place? Might be very hard to see, but if you see here, there really aren't any like patches, or like, you know, there's no like weird, like if you ever cut open an espresso puck and you look at the bottom, right, you don't see, you might see like different colored patches, right? You might see like darker spots, and then when you look at it, that's like basically, you know, an example of channeling or uneven extraction, or something went wrong somewhere in your prep, or all of that, right? Break this without having this puck explode everywhere. If you look at this, I can see, right, it's all the same color. Like there's no like dark spots in the middle. There's no channeling, right? So we're pulling evenly extracted espressos here. And a big part of that is, one, how we introduce water, but also two, it's really the grind size we're at, right? So it's like, you know, it's looking good. Is every grinder going to perform great at this grind size with this level of extraction? No, that's not the case. But, you know, for these types of coffees, that's what we're going for. I think, you know, you evenly extract. We want to reduce, like, if we want to experience all of the subtleties in these premium coffees, right? And like the work that these producers are doing and the roasters are doing and all of that, right? Those are notes that are going to appear in something like a cupping bowl. Those are notes that are going to appear in something like a high clarity pour over. But in espresso, we're fighting so many different things. and having the the baskets and the profiles and all of that just help us extract more evenly lets us actually experience some of those very like small nuances. So that's like the kind of thing to think about a little. And that's why I've tended to nowadays not make as much espresso with these types of coffees, because I'm like, like there's actually a fair bit of thought, once you get into doing this, yes, this is very, very easy to do, but like there's a fair bit of thought here, like, some amount of variables. Obviously you have to get some pieces of equipment, but there are a lot of like little small variables and things to think about when we are pulling coffees like this to kind of, honor the coffee, if that makes sense. Think about this as like acidity and sweetness. Like if you do low pre-infusion, low pressure, you really like get this balanced shot. The Turbo Bloom is like acidity up front at a sacrifice for like some of the balance. It's gonna like mimic the pressure profile, if that makes sense, in terms of how it tastes. So I think it's a different type of shot, right? And it's like fun to experience. And there are levels to this, right? Like that is the thing with Flair, why we really like Flair and all these, is that we can stylistically really manipulate things. But, I have my grind dialed in for most of these roast levels. The thing that I can manipulate now, and I know the shot will be evenly extracted because I have the basket, is like the dynamics now, right? So it's like these are shots of espresso and they're going to taste great, but we're looking for a stylistically different presentation. And all we're going to do now is we're going to pull, I don't know which coffee we're going to pull. Maybe let's pull this Honduras. COE Honduras, man, this coffee's great. We're going to pull a more balanced espresso. And we'll have like a stylistically very different coffee. And in something like espresso, you can like really, really change presentations a lot because you have that higher, more intense TDS. So even if you're using completely different coffees, you will still taste like the medium of the brew method, right? Which is what I've been saying since the beginning. It's like, we're gonna be tasting, this is what espresso is, right? To preface this, again, we're using very expensive coffee. So we're using coffees that have those nuanced characteristics that, we want to try to pull out. If you're pulling this type of shot, if you are using a lesser coffee, if you're using like lower quality coffees, or maybe you're using like very funky processed coffees, you may not like the presentation of the shot we just pulled, or any of these shots, or any of these coffees on espresso, because you might, extract too much out of them, or too much processing, or, if you're using a darker roast coffee, right? Like, again, if you wanted a lot of pain, you should pull dark roast with this profile. You should pull 27% dark roast. So anyway, I like to do 17 grams. And, real quick before we pull the next shot, I want to mention ratios again. So ratios, there are like two other, they're like, oh my God, I'm like now making this more complicated. Ratios with some of these, if you have a lower clarity burst set, like your 48 mil heptagonals, your niche zeros, I probably would not go above like 1 to 3.3, 3.5. If you have, of course, also we're using a Flair, so it's like kind of, we're limited to how much water we can put in. If you have higher clarity burst sets, I highly recommend you experiment into the 1 to 4 plus ranges, at least 1 to 3, like all of these, at least 1 to 3, because this will really let you experience a lot of those nuances of coffee. But also, if you are pulling coffees into that ratio, that really means your grind sizes are going to be, a little bit on the coarser end. They're going to let these coffees really open up, let you extract a lot, and this is what you want. Trust me, this is what you want. But also to reach those ratios in those times, at those flows, that does mean, you are pulling, you might want to tame the ratios for some of these. Otherwise, you push the coffee a little too hard. This is, again, the thing with high extraction is if you push the ratios out a little too much, you're getting a bit of stuff at the end where the flow is slightly too high and maybe your grinder can't handle it. Although I would make the argument that you can dial that out. So keep that in mind. Anyway, we have 17 grams, or 16.9. I'll throw one more bean of this in. This is the Honduras. Okay, let's get this second shot ready. And I'm going to pull a longer pre-infusion, but I'm basically at the same grind size. And what I'm going to still do is The difference here is I'm going to pre-infuse for a few seconds longer, but I'm going to still target the same kind of ramp up pressures and ramp up flow. This is much easier to see if you have a machine that has like a visualizer display, but in practice, you know, I still think with this type of experience with coffee, as much as we like numbers, as much as we like to track these things, if you are in anywhere in this realm, you can kind of just like let it go and you will end up with a good cup. And I wouldn't want the numbers to influence your flavors. Honduras gesha. Wash Honduras gesha. Man, crazy. Okay. So yeah, 17 grams again. And my espresso prep nowadays is like super simple. I just have this S-Works WDT, put it in here, and I'm operating at grind sizes where it's like, you know, it'll be fine because we're on the coarser end that the prep doesn't matter too much. Like you could just, you know, shake it up and throw it in and it'll taste good. I actually do have let's try to do this. Very expensive espresso. So this type of shot is just like a more approachable version of the shot we made earlier. So we're gonna just pre-infuse a little longer. But our grind sizes are the same, and our pressure, are like flow and all that are gonna be the same. So the pure manipulation here is just pre-infusion time. And we're still targeting this like 1 to 2 bar pre-infusion world, right? So here, except for I didn't grind fine enough. So now I'm gonna compensate and I'm gonna push up. Let me redo that. I wasn't grinding fine enough for this coffee. So that there is an example of, I started to pre-infuse at 2 bars. That shot time was also like, what, 10-ish seconds, or 10 to 15 seconds. And my grind size wasn't enough. On something like Flair, what I was doing was I noticed the grind size was not fine enough, and I just pushed it down harder to increase the flow to get into that 4 to 6 bar area. So I quote unquote saved the shot. But this will have a very different presentation to the initial shot, because the difference there was we didn't have this drop of pressure. So like this here, the first turbo bloom was we pushed down, we had a pressure increase and a pressure drop, and then a pressure increase. This here was, we were on the coarser end. So this is how you save a 2 course shot, is we pushed the lever down, we had an increase of pressure, and then there really wasn't a drop because we were too coarse. And to compensate, I just pushed it down harder. So there's no like pure drop of pressure. It's like kind of a slight thing here. So in our flow, we have an introduction of flow. And then instead of the flow dropping as that pressure also drops, we just have a constant flow. So it's kind of like just a more constant flow here. And we end up with a shot that doesn't really have a lot of crema, but we kind of can save these types of shots and still make good tasting espresso. So let's taste this and we'll see, right? As you see here, this really doesn't look like espresso, right? It's there's like no crema here. And maybe the extraction will be good. I actually am pretty confident that at least with my setup here, with the 01, this is going to taste great, right? But you can kind of save things if that happens to you by just pushing the lever down harder or increasing flow on your machine. We just have more of this coffee, so we'll tighten up the grind and we'll pull up another shot. Wow. Okay. I can tell for this coffee I want more contact time, but stylistically, like, this is a good tasting shot. I think there's some more things that we could pull out of this coffee if we had a finer grind, which is what we'll do. But for a shot that where you would look at this and you'd be like, this on paper shouldn't be good because the numbers are all wacky. This is tasting pretty good. I'm gonna let this cool down, but it's very sweet, very, very like sweetness forward. I wish there was more acidity. I know there's more acidity in this coffee, so we'll let it cool down. But this is more akin to something like really high extraction AeroPress. Like, this is what this kind of tastes like to me right now, which is when you effectively think about what an espresso setup is. It's, you know, and the styles of shot we're pulling, we are getting into that territory of high extraction immersion brewing. So this, to me, I think that could have more dynamics. And that is what we wanted to kind of do, but our flow was a little too fast. Our grind was a little, definitely too coarse. So we're getting like a sweet espresso that has acidity in it, but there's some like there's just some like missing components to this coffee, which can, you know, they'll appear on pour over, and we want to kind of try to get them in as espresso. But you know, this is a good tasting shot. We saved it by increasing the flow there, but I know there's more in this coffee to pull out. So let's pull up another shot, and we'll kind of try to compare these styles of shots. So this is too coarse. We compensated. We just increased flow to try to save things. So you get kind of like a sprover. Like this really, you know, I forgot. This is basically a sprover, a low ratio sprover. But we want to have like, you know, more ramping, a better looking curve, if that makes sense. So let's try pulling that shot again. But as you see here, again, because we're operating on the coarser ends of things and we have the high extraction basket, we end up with a very even espresso puck. Like if you look at this, look at that. You know, it's very coarse. So all the water flows through this very nicely. No black spots, no weird looking things there. If I break this puck apart, right, you can see that the colors in here are all very even. So we know the water is flowing through this correctly. It's just that we were definitely too coarse. We're getting something like Sprover, and Sprover for a Flair 58. This is the type of stuff where, you know, you unfortunately, you can only fit so much water in a Flair. If this happens to you on a pump machine, I would just let that run. Like keep letting it run until you get somewhere around your 1:8 to a 1:10 ratio, right? This here was still in that 1:4 ratio. It tastes fine, but you know, we're limited to the amount of water we can fit through here. So if this happens to you on a pump machine, just let it keep running. But as you see there, right, you know, nowadays it's like visuals, none of this stuff matters anymore, right? Like we shouldn't care about visuals with any of these. And in fact, all of your most ugly looking espressos are probably gonna taste the best. So we had that the Troubleshooting Kenyan gesha at the beginning, which was super acidity forward. We had this shot that was a little on the coarser end that we were able to save, more akin to Sprover, which is, you know, this is a mess up here where I was too coarse. I was able to save the shot, make it taste pretty good. If you're on a pump machine, you know, let it keep running. This, you know, very balanced, very, very sweet. Tastes like, you know, basically high extraction AeroPress, but stronger TDS. Now we want to try to pull, I would say still an acidity skewing shot, but more balanced with more sweetness. So this was the shot of espresso I was pulling on a different stream. You know, the first style of shot, which is like your turbo bloom, all of that, you get the nuances of acidity. So in this specific coffee, right, there's like, I think there's like this lemongrass effect, there's like an apple note, and it's really, you know, there's like a structure of acidity to it. On the turbo bloom, this coffee is going to be very lemongrass forward, and there's going to be so many layers of acidity. But we're sacrificing, you know, we're sacrificing like sweetness and balance to take all these acidity notes and kind of compact them to the front. And that's like the stuff that's in these more, you know, these high scoring coffees, these expensive coffees, these like layers and nuances. We're able to get that, but we sacrifice some of the balance and some of the sweetness. It will finish clean, but the most thing that you'll experience is acidity. This might actually be, you know, not approachable for a lot of people. But this style of shot we're trying to do is manipulate some of that, right? Like maybe let's tame the acidity a little more. Don't make it as crazy and bring some of that sweetness back in. So a different style shot. Which I think, you know, still most people like, and the biggest manipulation is going to be pre-infusion time. But we still want to bring in some of that acidity, which is why we target faster flow rates as we ramp up. I know what this coffee should taste like. I know there's more acidity to pull out of there, but I really like a lot of the sweetness, and it's clean. It's very floral, lingering on my palate. There's like so much sweetness lingering on my palate, but I want more acidity, right? So this is kind of like the too far out in one direction of too coarse. what we're trying to do is somewhere like in between these two shots here. So somewhere in between your turbo bloom and in between your like zero pressure Sprover type of shot, where you get, you know, some amount of acidity. It is more turbo bloom acidity skewing, but with a lot of those sweetness, right? This is too sweetness forward to me, or too, you know, too muddied, or, you know, it's not muddied, but like, you know, I know there's acidity that's in this coffee that I want to pull out. So I guess this is good that we pulled a shot that isn't you know, perfect. Although all of this is very subjective, right? And if you have coffees that are louder, they may appear, you know, they may kind of skew things in certain directions, depending on, you know, if you have a low clarity coffee, and then also, again, we get back to the whole conversation of grinders and burst sets and all that. But so I was at 1.1, 1.2 on the 01. I'm gonna go, let's go to 0.8. Let's try 0.8 out. So trying to get our shot that's in between, where a lot of the manipulation is through the actual profiling. I think it's okay to be on the finer end, because you can like, that's the thing with the Flair. I was like super coarse. It tastes okay. If it's too fine, I can still fix it because of the magic of profiling. Throw this guy back in. So I'm targeting somewhere in between these two shots. So my 2 bars, I'm pre-infusing slow. I see the first few drops. And then I ramp up all the way to 5, 6 bars. I still have coffee here. I'm ramping down. My Akaya is running out of battery. Ramp down, pressure slow. And then we end up here, natural pressure decline at 62. And my shot time was actually like 22-ish seconds, 23, 22 seconds. So I should have used a clear cup so you could see, but there is some amount of crema. Oh, very scary. But the shot was slow at the beginning, fast towards the back there. The thing is this shot should be like literally in between these two, where we were way too coarse here. We were able to kind of save it. On a Flair, a little harder to do that. This one, we were going super fast, 1 second turbo bloom. You know, you yeet the thing. And then this is somewhere in between the two. And this is what I think is still, you know, if I were to say like 9 bar espresso, do not do that. You are killing the coffee. You should throw away your espresso machine if you pull those types of shots with these coffees. Then you have your slower pre-infusion up to 6 bar shot. Then you have something like this, which is like a sort of faster flow at the end than something like, I would say, a normal turbo. But because it has longer pre-infusion, but we have other stuff that lets us pull very fast at the end and evenly extract. Then you have turbo bloom. Then you have this like way too coarse, aka just make AeroPress type of Sprover brew. So that is like those are like kind of stylistically the shots that you can pull, right? Like, or the larger categories of shots that you can pull. The reason why I think a lot of people will enjoy the shot is that because for coffees like this, there are a lot of those nuanced notes, right? And you want to get those nuanced notes, but maybe you don't want things to be like too acidity forward. You still want to have an enjoyable espresso. And you like those more muddier characteristics, or, you know, of like low and slow pre-infusion shots, but we are combining some of that faster flow that we get with this. So you kind of get the, you know, in between both. Depends on what you like. I still prefer turbo bloom style shot, but we'll give this a taste. There was a lemongrass note that I was missing from this coffee because, you know, we only have so much water we can fit in the Flair for the super coarse style of shot. So there we go. There's that structure that I was missing with this. It has the strength that this shot has, but it is not as acidity forward. So that's the thing, is like it's more balanced, more sweet. It's still skewing, but you get it's still skewing towards acidity, but it has a lot of sweetness in there, right? And that's because we pre-infuse at the beginning at 2-ish bars for a few seconds longer. So the longer you pre-infuse, generally speaking, will introduce more of that, like, you know, balance. Some people could perceive that as muddiness, but it boosts up a lot of that perceivable sweetness at a sacrifice of acidity. But because we are still pulling very fast at the end, and we are still, pulling very to larger ratios and lower pressures, we are able to accomplish, extract enough of the acidity that is in this coffee, and we can get the layered nuances, right? In this coffee, I think it's like lemongrass. There's an apple note. It's clean. It's crisp. It's floral. The Turbo Bloom that we pulled, Turbo Bloom would just be like lemongrass forward, acidity forward, sacrifice the sweetness, sacrifice maybe some of that florality at the end. This here is, if I were to just guess numbers, right? If your Turbo Bloom is like your 9 or 10 out of 10 in terms of acidity presentation, this is maybe like a 7 to 8. So you get enough detail, but the thing that lingers is that there is now this transition period between your acidity to the sweetness. Like you can tell that things are tied together very much like how if you brewed this coffee, this is a high scoring coffee, how's their harmony and how are things tied together in the cup? It depends stylistically on what you're going for though, right? If I were to taste this, right? Yes, I think it's an acidity forward coffee and an acidity forward espresso shot. And it's sweet. It's clean, it's floral. I still wish there was like, more acidity. And that's where I think the Turbo Bloom profile is still stronger in that regard. Personally, that's what that's like what I prefer. I would say that for most people, they probably prefer the shot I just pulled, because if you aren't used to you need to get used to tasting this like style of shot. And again, these styles of shots, I would say for sure the Turbo Bloom does not work well with majority of lower end grinders. Like if you're using like a lower end grinder, I would say focus more on slower flow rates. If you're using your 98 flats, some of the 64 mil flats, of course, please experiment, may not get a really good type of shot. And some of this is again down to your gear. So like you can compensate in certain areas with grind size and flow rates and temperature, but ultimately speaking, like some of these shots are not very strong, especially because of the contact time. Like, 15-second espresso shot, right? How many grinders and burst sets work with a 15-second long espresso shot, right? Like not many. But it's really interesting if you can nail it down, right? If you've never tasted espresso like this, like, whoa, that is really, really good. It's super vibrant. It's super acidity forward. There's so much detail in the acidity. Of course, sacrificing some of the sweetness. This style shot, you can do it on most grinders. Is it going to taste good on a niche zero? I don't think so. Is it going to taste good on 98 flat? Of course. But you're getting this wider sweet spot, right? Like literally sweeter espresso. But if you can pull this type of shot, and please experiment, right? Like maybe you want to do a shot that's like in between these two. And what you adjust is just still that pre-infusion time. Like still focus on that 3 to 3+ mil exit flow rate, but focus on the pre-infusion time, right? Play around with how hard you pull the lever down, or how light you pull the lever down, or if you're on an E61 or something like that, right? It's still your pre-infusion time, and I think that's like going to drastically impact the dynamics in the cup. Right? Like all of these, like let's be real, all of these coffees, if you are in the realm of what I'm doing, they're gonna taste great, especially if you're using coffees of this caliber. However, it depends on personal preference and stylistically what you're going after. So here we go. Yep, see, it's still, beautiful, even, nice color, no weird discoloration in the puck. This thing's hot, so I'm trying to not like hurt myself holding this. We're still at the grind sizes and we're still at the style of shot where our flow is super, really why this looks this way is because of how we're able to maintain that flow or increasing flow as we are ramping up, right? So we're ramping up and we're keeping the shot into the 4 to 6 bar range, right? AKA we, if you have a Flair 58, if you look at this gauge, none of our shots ever, look at this. None of our shots are ever in this range, right? This is bad. That's bad. Don't do this. You see that? It says espresso. That's bad. Don't do that. That means your pressures are too high and you're throwing your money away, right? You want to be lower than that. That's how you make good coffee. With these types of coffees, like, there are so many techniques now to pull espresso, and I still think if you want the intensity, right, we're pulling these coffees still to a larger ratio, but all of these are going to have higher TDS than, you know, even your high extraction AeroPress, even your high extraction pour overs and all of that. There's a level of intensity that is really interesting with espresso. The challenge is taming the TDS, right? It's taming the TDS, and that's why we like to go to the larger ratios so we can get the extension of flavor notes and the extension of acidity and the depth that is inherently in these very premium coffees, right? And that is where you just need to really keep in mind of the style of shot you're pulling, right? Is that, like, do you really want to be pulling a muddy shot of espresso with your $20 shot coffee, right? And while there is a larger sweet spot with most of these coffees, generally speaking, right, it's harder to mess up and pull a bad shot. You still want to make your money's worth, right? Like, make it worth it that you got a coffee like that. And that's still why I tend to not recommend people brew these coffees as espresso, because there's a lot that can go wrong in the espresso world, right? But if you can kind of nail things down, then I think you're going to get a stellar tasting espresso, right? You're getting, like, these espressos to me, even though you guys know I dislike espresso, I'm like, this is really good. Like, this, I would pay for this espresso shot that I'm tasting right now. Of course, I think the coffee is really carrying the story. But like, this to me is I'm not tasting as much espresso, right? Like, what does espresso taste like? Like, I'm not, this is my challenge with espresso nowadays, is like, people have, especially shops, right? You go to a shop, like, people have this vision of what espresso should taste like. I am not interested in today's world to taste what espresso tastes like. I'm interested in tasting what the coffee tastes like. And that is the challenge with, espresso in general, is that I really think for these types of coffees, there's so much work that goes into them. You don't want to be tasting what espresso tastes like, right? You don't want to be tasting, this is what high TDS tastes like, this is what pressure tastes like, this is what crema tastes like, right? You want to be tasting those inherent notes that happened from a producer level to the roaster level, to, like, this is what the coffee, inherently has. And those are the things that this is what I've been saying ever since the beginning of the stream and video, I guess, is you're fighting against the medium in itself, right? But if you can get it right, you end up with these coffees, higher TDS, like, intense presentations of those nuances. And I think that is what's really interesting to kind of look for if you do want to go down this terrible path of pulling espresso. So yeah, that's like the long ramble on pulling these coffees, and, like, the styles of shots I would do, the kind of approach and methodology and whatever you want to call it. Espresso is fun, okay? But yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to go over. But I think we'll make this into a YouTube video. So see you guys later.